iHeartRadio Broadway, driven by Mercedes-Benz. The best or nothing.
Jennifer Nettles, welcome to iHeartRadio Broadway.
Thank you very much. SJ, should I call you SJ or Sarah? What would you like professionally?
SJ is perfect.
Good. I'm like, everybody's calling you that, so I want to make sure. Yes.
So congratulations on the new album, Always Like New. It is such a beautiful collection of a tribute to musical theater and Broadway. I cannot stop listening to it. So first and foremost, congratulations.
Thank you. I am so glad you like it, and I am really, really thrilled with it. I am tickled about it. I love the response to it, but most of all, I have loved making it.
So you have been not only on Broadway, you've performed Mamma Mia at the Hollywood Bowl, you've been a champion of Broadway and our industry for a long time. So what was the impetus to create an album just dedicated to musical theater?
Well, this album has been a long time coming for me. Like many of us in the performing arts, I have a history growing up in musical theater. So all through school and high school and college, and even had a point at the end of college where I was considering, okay, do I want to focus on theater or do I want to focus strictly on music? And at the time I went to college in Atlanta. I'd had some, I've been playing out in clubs and doing my own original material, and I had some traction there. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to focus on this. And I'm so happy that I did, of course, because I love music and I have been blessed, with such success with that. But at the same time, I always wanted to be able to fulfill that part of me that was also still there the whole time, which loved musical theater. Fast forward, and thankfully having the success that I did, I was able, as you mentioned, to make my Broadway debut in 2015, which is just like, to enter back into the theater community on Broadway is like the head of a pin, like it's just like such a fantastic community, but such a small percent of people in the entire world, who get to do it. So felt so lucky with that. And really from that point forward, it reignited my fire for the theater in that way. And I continued to expand myself. All that is to say, historically, a long time coming. Musically speaking, I had always had the arranger and writer part of me, always had the classics that I loved, some of them bouncing around in there in the ways of like, oh, if I sang this, this is how I would sing it. Most specifically, what I call the Trinity, which was sort of the foundation for this album in terms of, oh, what a beautiful morning, sit down, you're rocking the boat, and wouldn't it be lovely? Those were really the inspirations. And I had been sharing some of those inspirations with my executive producer, Adam Zodovich, and he said, you need to do this record, and you need to do it now, and you need to do it with Alex Lacamoire. And I was like, okay, cool. And I had known Alex through his work, but I had never met him and didn't know him personally. So Adam introduced us and shared with him, the ideas. We sent some voice notes back and forth of just sort of like how I re-envisioned things. He liked the concept. He liked the musical ideas that I was sending over. And so he jumped on board and said, yes, let's do it. So we began then the process of exploring and discovering, which of these songs we wanted to rearrange. So that's sort of like short story long, but a long time coming, and definitely out of an extreme love of musical theater and the whole canon that is so rich.
And what was it like working with Alex Lacamoire? I mean, he's such a musical genius. So I'm curious what it was like working with him on this album.
A dream. An absolute dream. I mean, it was so fun, I think, and so rewarding for both of us, because we were both able to, there was a place where we overlapped and met in the middle. And then there were some places where our experiences and our careers and the differences in them complemented each other in such a beautiful way. So, for example, in the studio, the musicians, the cats that we brought in to record this album, he would bring from his tribe and I would bring from my tribe. And, you have to really choose well when you're choosing.
Absolutely.
Because sometimes that can go well and it can mesh and turn into this whole new beautiful creation. And sometimes it's like the confluence of it rubs up against each other and it does not. Thankfully, with the fantastic musicians that we chose, it turned into something completely new and thus always like new. That's part of the inspiration, of course, for the title, which I can also share with you. But all that is to say, a dream to work with him. You know, we approached this and the selection of these songs very meticulously, as musical directors do, as arrangers do, as musical theater does, very meticulously. And we also had overarching two really important criteria for how we chose which songs went on here. Number one, could we respectfully honor the compositions as they were originally presented? But could we take them then, secondly, could we take them to and elevate them to a new place that was fresh and different and allowed for rediscovery? And some, you know, it was pretty clear early on, like, no, this one won't, this one's too much like the original. Okay, here, you know, like that was a wonderful criteria to help us weed through all of this life and beauty that is, you know, in musical theater history.
And I want to talk about the song selection in a second, but on top of not only being a huge fan of yours for a long time, there's almost a freeing quality to the vocal on this album. And I'm curious if that, I'm curious if that was freeing in itself for you, or if that was more of a challenge for you.
Oh my God, how liberating. You know, because here's the thing, from a music standpoint and from a compositional standpoint, modern popular music, under which country falls, pop music does, country does, anything that would be like anything the kids are listening to that goes out into the mainstream consciousness that would be on the radio, quote unquote. I say quote unquote now because streamers and who the hell knows. Right. But all that is to say, anything under the modern popular music umbrella, it has a very rigid structure. It's like verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, done. You know, or even especially vocally in terms of vocal melodies. I mean, like never in country music would I have a need to sing the E above the C above middle C, you know, like never. I would never. That would just be, there's just really not space for it. And it's not something that, you know, that the modern ear is used to listening to on radio, so to speak. So, and also in terms of the vocal melodies themselves, they're just much more rigid. Whereas in musical theater, it's like it rambles and it expands and it flies and it comes back around and it, you know, it soars and it goes to other places, both not only in terms of range, but also just in terms of there are different movements and there are different figures within, and it really is expansive. So for me as a vocalist, to be able to finally expand into those parts of my chops, you know, and to get to express myself with that part of my instrument that's always been there, was and is, even in its performance, is super liberating.
And with the vocal selections, with the song selections, you know, it could be so easy to just stick to classic musical theater or contemporary musical theater. But the 10 songs that you have chosen are such a wonderful mix of a historical outlook on Broadway musical theater. So I think for me, the arrangements, especially for like Wait For It, it's such a surprising arrangement. But then you go into the big gospel numbers like Oh, What a Beautiful Morning. But I think my favorite song is Anyone Can Whistle because of the simplicity of the arrangement of the song, because you go from listening to all these big numbers and then you get to that one, it's like it slows down and it lets you breathe for a minute.
Yes, I love that. And I love that for two reasons. Number one, because you are speaking of also the very conscious selection in terms of the track listing and how an album flows. And I am a big fan in my generation of the album format. I love that. I believe it's such a beautiful artistic statement and a journey. It's not just a single, but it does take you, it allows you to settle into it and take you places, right? And much like this one, even on the vinyl, if you get the vinyl, it feels like where you flip the record is like it's like a two-act musical, and that's the intermission, you know, right? Where the
right.
So all of that is beautiful artistic choice. But also what you're alluding to is just the diversity on the album and the diversity in that journey. And I love those beautiful, simple moments too. You know, we made choices not only musically, but we also made choices. We wanted to make sure, yes, classic is represented, contemporary is represented, also specific composers. Like, how can you do a record that is trying at least to show a very a very demonstrative swap, still such a limited swap in terms of the entire legacy of musical theater, and not include song? I mean, you have to. So we really wanted to make sure we did that. And I loved, you know, from the inspiration of it, that guitar part at the top really has almost this sort of Beatles Blackbird.
Yes.
Vibe,
yes.
Right? So I love the treatment of that, the arrangement of that song. And I love that song is represented for sure.
And the other song that I think is very surprising is There's a Sucker Born Every Minute from Barnum. It's such a surprising choice, but it's such a cool choice. And I'm curious how that song made it on the album.
Well, you know, again, in looking to make the album musically diverse to the ear, we wanted to have different kinds of, arrangements on there. So Wait For It, for example, that you mentioned, was an example of that. We knew we wanted like a droney, spooky vibe represented, and Wait For It, you know, ended up really, really expanding nicely into that vibe. We also knew we wanted like some levity, you know, just like some buoyancy and some fun. And that song, There's a Sucker Born Every Minute, is clearly like checks that box with a big green.
Yep.
You know, like it's just so absolutely fun. I had also, you know, in terms of personal connections, I was in high school, I was in Barnum. So I love that production so very much. And, you know, I think for a myriad of reasons, it's such a wonderful little nugget on the album that is so bright and so fun.
And there are only 10 songs on the album. So I'm curious, how hard was it to keep it to only 10? And does this mean we'll get a secondary and a third musical theater album from Jennifer Nettles?
I would love that. Listen, I mean, the whole canon is an embarrassment of riches, as we all know. So there's much to choose from should we, you know, get to do a second volume, if you will. And we'll see, you know, I mean, like we could have kept going forever. We just stopped from a matter of like efficiency in time, of like, we feel like we've got a beautiful representation here, a nice little package tied up in a beautiful bow. But, you know, like even on the Target has an exclusive for this album. And there are 2 more on there. There's Not While I'm Around, which is also obviously Sondheim. Beautiful. So check that out. And then there, and so Not While I'm Around, and She Used to Be Mine.
Amazing.
Yeah. So listen, we could go on and on and on if we wanted to. We just kind of was like, okay, we need to like tie this up in the right way and do it now. And there'll be more as there can be more.
And on Saturday night, I had the honor of seeing you perform for the first time since the pandemic.
Yes.
The very, very rainy night at the Little Island with Broadway Inspirational Voices. And you performed 2 songs, Sit Down, You Rock in the Boat and Oh, What a Beautiful Morning. And can I say I sat in the audience weeping, first performance back that I've been in an audience situation, and watching you perform with the BIV was breathtaking. And they are on this album as well.
They are on this album. You will hear them on Oh, What a Beautiful Morning and Sit Down, You're Rockin' the Boat. And we performed those both, yes, on Saturday. I actually have chills because for me, it was my first performance live in front of an audience since before the pandemic, you know, in well over a year. So meaningful for me to be able to perform, number one, with them, to be able to perform with them at Michael McElroy, who is making his way into bigger and broader things out in the world. Getting to, you know, give him a musical send-off was super special. It was also Father's Day weekend. It was also Juneteenth. It's also Pride. Like, it was just a big celebration performance on so many levels.
And we all stayed around through the rain, through the mist, through the passing of the ponchos. And it was such a wonderful night.
The passing of the ponchos. I know. I looked out, it was like a sea of blue ponchos.
It's like, we're gonna make this work. We're gonna make it work. With the album, what is the biggest takeaway that you want people to know about this album? What do you want them to learn about you in this journey of listening to Always Like New?
Ooh, to learn about me?
Mm-hmm.
I think what I would love is that just like the album title implies, Always Like New, for me as an artist, and this was also part of the inspiration for the title, as an artist, we are constantly and always evolving into something new. Always. I think to me, that is the sign of a real artist. I think there are people who are wonderful interpreters, song interpreters, and they will interpret what is in front of them. But I think in terms of artistry and creation and composition and interpretation, I think for me as an artist, it's always about that expansion. And this for me is definitely, if you only know me from what I call my shiny silo of success, which is in Sugarland, which is great. It's a beautiful shiny silo.
Absolutely.
And yet it's a silo nonetheless. We are all bigger than the lanes in which we are told to stay. I think, vocally you will hear so much expansion for me, but I think the common thread, SJ, that runs through all of it is I'm always storytelling. If it is as a singer-songwriter, if it is in country music, if it is on the musical stage with musical theater, if it is in front of a camera and, on Righteous Gemstones or Harriet or whatever it may be, I'm so interested and so in love with storytelling and with creating character. And so this album is a further extension then of my artistry in that way.
And with creating characters, is it true that you are writing a musical yourself? Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. I would love to tell you a little bit about it. It is the story of a 17th century slow poisoner in Italy named Giulia Tofana. And I say slow poisoner in the sense that, long story short, she basically helped women kill their husbands. Women at the time, most especially, but even all over the world in certain places now are and definitely were considered property. And in horrible situations, there was no divorce back then. As a matter of fact, she's attributed with what is called the first Italian divorce. So it is her story. But for me, what I'm interested in her story is what I call the hidden half of history. And I think that, for so long, the very limited lens of history that we have experienced has been obviously through the eyes of the conqueror, as I say, which are colonialist white males. And yet throughout history, there have been so many other people besides that very small group who have experienced it and who have been there living their lives. And if we knew the stories of women and people of color, if we knew more of those stories and more of those voices, how would the world be different today? Because we get the stories of celebrating, William Wallace and Braveheart. We get the stories of celebrating Gladiator. We get the stories of celebrating, all of these men who went out and in the name of freedom and liberty, killed so many hundreds and thousands of people and destroyed so many communities. And yet there have to have been women who wanted freedom just as hungrily, and how did we handle that over the course of history? So this is one of those stories.
So where are you on the path of creating this musical? How far along the creative journey?
Yes. So I wrote a ton of music for this story. And the beautiful part about the way that this story is unfolding is through the music. As I say, it's called a musical for a reason.
Right.
So the way that we've been handling it is, rather than having a book written, an already established book written, and then going in and song spotting, it's more like, no, I know this story within me and I want the music to happen. And then we're going to craft together what that story is around it. So I wrote a ton of the bulk of it over this pandemic because, well, number one, like we all did, I had way more time than I'd ever had. Right. I was dying to continue to express myself. And also, too, it was such a fantastic escape because I mean, the world around us was so confronting. There was so much anxiety, and it's way more fun to dive into someone else's anxiety in life or death situations than it is like your own around you, right? This is way more fun. So in all of those ways, it was a beautiful and creative time for me for this story. So a lot of the music and the story is there in terms of book writer. I'm in the process now of trying to figure out, who the best person for that will be, but I'm excited in that process too.
I'm really excited to listen to it, and I'm excited to see the path that it takes over the next few years. So my last question to you, as we move out of this pandemic and Broadway reopens and hopefully we get to see you on a Broadway stage again, is there a dream role in Broadway that you are dying to play?
Look, I have had a couple that in different ways, I feel like I have sort of, expanded through and wanted it. I would obviously, when I think about stories for women in contemporary theater, when Wicked came onto the scene, it was just such a game changer, I think. Yeah. In terms of stories for women. So that was an iconic and inspiring role to me. I lament that I was never able to make it work, though thankfully got the phone calls for Waitress, and just could never make it work in terms of my own schedule to have it make sense. But Sarah is a dear friend, and that show and all of that music is so rich and so important to me. Those are two really beautiful ones that, I have really loved and connected to over the years. But I would say, really in terms of dreams, now that I am in writing this musical, that has become the biggest dream for me, for sure.
Well, I'm so excited for everyone to listen to this album. I think you are going to find brand new fans in Broadway who discover you for the first time, and those that have loved you forever to find and discover new musical theater opportunities as well. So Jennifer Nettles, thank you so much for joining iHeartRadio Broadway today.
Thank you, SJ. Thank you for having me. And yeah, I hope everybody goes out and listens to the record.
It's out on June 25th, Friday.
Friday. Yep.
Perfect. Thanks, Jennifer.
Thank you.
iHeartRadio Broadway, driven by Mercedes-Benz. The best or nothing.